Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this is Clara.
And we're from Therapeutic Oasis in South Florida, and we'd like to welcome you to our last class in our series of 4. In this series, we have focused on create, Ohana, physical well-being, and today is emotional awareness. And it's a little sad that it's our last class, but we saved the best for last. Talking about feelings, and we're hearing a lot of things in the news and on social media. I'm seeing a lot of things about how to, like, quick tips to get around feeling uncomfortable and avoid feelings, and how can you do this and do that. And so unfortunately today we're not going to be talking about how to get around feelings. We're going to be talking about how to
how to sit in them.
Sit in them.
And not run away from them, because they're not bad.
Yes, feelings are not bad. In fact, feelings are really, really important. So I'm going to actually share an analogy about feelings, because you reminded me when you said they weren't bad. I was thinking about the alert system that we have or thinking about it as an alert system. So if you were to think about emotions like different alarms, just like you have in your house, and depending upon what type of emotion you have, there's a different alarm, and that alarm tells you exactly what is needed. So for instance, if the fire alarms were to go off, and I hope not, because I'm going to have to restart this video again, but if the fire alarm were to go off, that would alert me of, oh, okay, that's the fire alarm, and this is what I need to do. So if I hear the fire alarm go off, I'm not going to go check my phone. Or my dryer. Or the dryer, But if I hear the dryer go off, I'm going to go into the laundry room. If I hear, the microwave beep, I'm going to go, open the microwave and get my food out. And so I want you to be thinking about, or we want you to be thinking about, having a feeling and having an emotion is actually a really positive thing. And this is your body talking to you. And when your body's talking to you, it's helpful to try to have a dialogue with it. And we know that emotions can often be overwhelming, especially if you're experiencing several emotions. And this is the feedback that we get all the time. I mean, people come to us when they're having an emotional problem or having overwhelming emotions, and they're not really sure, how do I manage this? And I imagine that if I was in a house and every single alarm was going off at the same time, can you imagine? Like your dryer, your oven, your microwave,
you would probably shut down.
I wouldn't. I mean, I would just run out of the house. Actually, would be too overwhelming. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about emotions in the body and how it's really helpful and how to name it, look at the intensity of it, and learn a little bit about more about particular emotions and what they're trying to say. And then we're going to we added a worksheet to this lesson so that we can learn how to surf a wave through the emotions. So I want to should we start with some brain stuff, or should we start with I
think we should start with the brain, because it can be interesting to know what exactly is happening and why you might be reacting the way you're reacting, and why somebody else might be reacting differently.
And it's so, we've learned so much about brain science over the years, and when we really understand that emotions are something that's happening in the brain and the body, it does make sense. So just like science helps us make sense out of our environment, and I'm sure, years and years ago, if there was a shooting star, people would probably start to get really freaked out about it because they didn't know the science behind it, or to look out into the ocean and go, oh my god, the world is flat, and I'm just gonna fall off the edge because we didn't really know the science behind it. So there's an analogy that talks about this, and so in our prefrontal cortex, this is where we do overthinking and our problem solving, and then something happens and we have a reaction and we start to have an emotion. And when we're starting to have an emotion, at that point you're in a race where either your amygdala is going to win or your prefrontal cortex is going to win. Yes. And so we know that if you can start to name your emotion, you can tame your emotion. And that happens in the prefrontal cortex. And if you're not naming your emotion and it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger and that amygdala takes over, this is where you fall into that fight, flight, freeze. And we say that you're flipping your lid because instead of working out your problems here, you're in the back door. Yeah. And so the analogy is like this. If you're driving in a car and you're approaching a yellow light and you were to just hit the gas, this is like telling the amygdala to just go for it and just to take over. And there could be consequences from that. We really don't know how that's going to turn out for you. And if you were to see the yellow light and start to hit the brakes or start to slow down, this is like using your prefrontal cortex and being able to problem solve something in a safer and more effective way.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've all had that experience of feeling like, oh, I can't stop, I need to keep going, you know, even though slowing
in my
down
car
might be more
and in my
effective.
brain.
Yes, all of above.
Yeah. Right. And so let's start by giving some categories of emotions. So we'll start with like the basic two. Sometimes when people are really, really overwhelmed, we like to break it up into the two categories.
Which is comfortable or uncomfortable.
Yeah, comfortable and uncomfortable. So it's really simple to name, you know, what do you notice now? Are you feeling comfortable or uncomfortable? And so let's imagine that someone says, I'm feeling uncomfortable. So if someone's feeling uncomfortable, we second want them to describe the intensity of the emotion. 0 to 10. 10 is the most uncomfortable you've ever been, and 0 is to be neutral. And so what my 10 is going to be is different than what Stephanie's 10 is going to be, because we are different.
Yeah, and you're more of like the thinking,
thinker.
and I'm more of the feeler. So I'm going to instantly go maybe a little faster than you.
Yeah. And it depends on our experience too, because our past experience informs how we react to things in the moment. So as a rule of thumb, if you're a 5 or higher, we would want you to use some self-soothing skills to try to bring your number down a little bit before you walk into problem solving with your emotion or problem solving with a person. And so in the other 3 videos, we gave some tips about how to self-regulate to be able to do that. So let's assume that you are in a 0 to 4 area where you notice the emotion, you notice that you're uncomfortable, you notice the intensity, so let's say it's a 4, and you're wanting to then do something with it. So the next thing that we want you to do with the emotion is we want you to be able to name the emotion. And there's so many names that we can use for emotions. And so when people say something like, you know, I'm overwhelmed, or something feels weird, or I'm depressed.
A lot of the I feel statements tend to actually be I think statements, which can get confusing into what you're actually feeling. So I know that you like to use like what we call the primary emotions.
Yes, the primary emotions. And there's a lot of different different people, have different labels for emotions. So this is just based on what we find works. So for comfortable emotions, if you were feeling comfortable, we would say that that's joy, and there's that some label, any word that you can use, but basically it's joy. And so oftentimes we don't have too many dialogues with people about joy because they're feeling good, so they wouldn't be
seeing us. Unfortunately.
Yes. So when we're feeling uncomfortable, there are 4 basic types of discomfort, and this is based on how they feel. So these all feel a little bit different in the body. So that's where I want you to think about alarms or alerts. All of these have a slightly different quality to the way that they alert us. And so the first one that I want to talk to you about is sadness. And so we do tend to feel our sadness somewhere in our core region. And so that's not an exact science. Sometimes we can feel sad in different places. Sometimes people say if they're really overwhelmed that they feel sad all over, especially when thinking about like the emotion of grief. Because remember, even though when I'm saying, okay, I feel a 6 and it's mostly sad, there may be other emotions in there. I'm just wanting to be curious about what do you feel mostly in this moment.
Right.
So let's say that I'm feeling mostly sad, and I'm noticing that I'm feeling it in my core region, And so sometimes when we're sad, we might tear up, we might want to cry, and that's actually really, really helpful because our tears do emit a hormone that helps soothe us and soothe the emotional pain. It helps us wash away the emotional pain that we have when
it's like our natural pain reliever.
It's a natural pain reliever, yeah. So, which again, the body.
Yeah.
I mean, body's amazing.
It is.
Yeah. So sometimes if we let our bodies just sort of be in control and do their thing, they're actually really helpful and they show up for us. So utilizing the word sad, I feel sad, and being really mindful of that can be really helpful. So the next one, anger. Yes, anger. Anger out of the 4 is one of the easiest emotions to feel. It's very easy to get angry. I think that a lot of people give themselves just permission to be angry, and so angry could mean a lot of things. Whether on the higher end of the scale, you could be like livid. On the lower end of the scale, you could just be
passive
annoyed,
aggressive.
all these different things. So whatever word you use, we'll just say the experience is anger. And sometimes people will feel anger in their limbs and in their fists, in their face. And you can notice maybe your body temperature feels a little bit off. And so what's really important to really tune into when it comes to anger is that anger is often a secondary emotion. And that means that underneath anger, whether it was a knee-jerk reaction or not, there's probably something that you might be sad about or that you might be fearful about, right? And so who knows? Sometimes it's hard to get that. Sometimes it's so quiet and subtle. It's the primary emotion, and we might not realize later, and unless we really follow what it is that we're thinking in our minds, like what is this that I'm feeling. And
by being able to identify our emotions, we're going to be working on not having that anger show up as much as that secondary.
Yes, that's a really great point. So if something triggers you and causes you to feel uncomfortable, and you just sort of let it go, eventually it can roll into anger and show up for you as anger. So even the subtle emotions, it's really important to be able to notice the discomfort, notice the emotional number, and be able to name it maybe before it turns into the secondary emotion of anger. And fear. So fear, we could say, can be anywhere from, panic to worry. And so fear, we do tend to feel more so in our chest or upper body or throat. Sometimes we can kind of feel like we have something, like stuck here, when we're afraid. And so fear is really important to attend to and actually get really curious about it. Sometimes fear is telling us that we need to protect ourselves and maybe not walk into something. And then sometimes fear is happening because we have this belief that there is an invisible tiger that's going to get us. And I mean, this can show up in a lot of, what's an idea? What do we hear about how this can, public speaking?
That's a big one. I think a lot of people.
Or right now, going to the grocery store.
Well, right, because I was actually going to say it's really important to remember that fear does really serve a purpose, because without fear, we might all be out at the grocery store without masks, like being like, hey, it's okay,
Right, So fear helps us to really check in and say, is this really wise here? And you might notice that, okay, I'm having this fear because this past event is informing me and telling me to be afraid of it, and yet today maybe I don't need to be afraid of that anymore, so maybe I would challenge that fear. And just as a side note, when people are challenging their fears, we call that exposure therapy. So exposure therapy is when you notice that you are having this anxiety and you are having fears surrounding something, and it's not effective for you, and you really know that it's something that you don't need to be afraid of. And so what we do is we would expose you to that fear, and every time we expose you to that fear and you're okay after, you're showing your brain that there really isn't it's really not a tiger that's going to get you. And so the brain stops dumping those stress hormones. And
the intensity gets less and less after each exposure.
Yeah. So it's important to, again, pay attention to fear, where it shows up in the body, and is it something that truly is a safety issue, or is it something that's making you nervous because there's judgments and beliefs that surround it, and it's something that would be really effective for you to challenge and work through. The last one. So disgust. Yeah. So a lot of people, I don't really hear the word disgust. Disgust too much. We don't really think about that, and there's not like maybe a lot of words to describe it. There's more of like ew, or like gross.
The facial expressions.
So disgust is really the sort of felt sense. So when we have things that we value and we hold really, really dear to us, and we are in situations where we are going against our own values, or other people are going against our values, we tend to have this gut response in our stomach, and that's disgust. And so it also refers to seeing things that you think are disgusting. So it can literally be disgusting, or you can have the sense of the behavior and the belief is so out of line with what you believe that you feel disgust in that situation. And so it's really, really important to honor this alert that's going off, because this alert, it often shows up in our interpersonal relationships, and sometimes it's a red flag that we ignore. And when we ignore this red flag and we continue to be in relationships that time and time again are causing us to have this sense of disgust, we really start to feel out of order with ourselves and who we are. And we start to notice that we're surrounding ourselves with people who are not like-minded, and that will affect your joy. And so if you can notice the alert of disgust and hear yourself and hear what it is that this emotion is trying to tell you to speak or to work out, you might notice more joy in your relationships, because then you're going to be, motivated to connect with other people who share your same values.
You're building more effective relationships for yourself.
Right. So those are the basics. So when you start to feel uncomfortable and you get the intensity of the discomfort, I want you to be able to separate it and ask yourself, what is it mostly? Am I mostly sad? Am I mostly angry? I'm mostly afraid? Or is it mostly disgust?
Right. And then what's the intensity of that?
Yes. And so now comes the wave sheet, because what do you do with it once you know all this information?
Right.
And so you'll see on the screen we have the wave sheet, which is up, and in the wave sheet you can use the wave sheet at any point of this process. So if you feel like, I got so emotional so quick and the situation is over now, so there's no point in going back to it, it's actually not true. So we know by journaling through our life experiences and our reactions, we're actually building in ways that our brain can learn to cope in future situations that are similar. And this is where being aware of our emotions is really, really helpful. So it's never too late to address, a behavior from the past. So the first thing that you're going to do in your wave is identify the prompting event. So what was the moment that you started to feel that emotion? And this is something that you can, it's observable behavior. So it means someone could see it, you see it, and it's not what you guess about it, it's what you know actually happened. The second thing that you're going to do is you're going to start to note your interpretations about what happened. So oftentimes we have these stories in our head, and we can run with these stories, and they could be really amazing, because when we don't know how people really think, our minds do want to guess and fill in the blanks. Sometimes we do that in a really judgy way. And so here, when you notice your interpretations, that's where you can do some work to challenge those beliefs for yourself, or you can test the evidence, which means go ask a question, check in, and find out, this is what I thought, is that really what you meant?
And that kind of goes back to thought distortions that we've talked about in the last classes.
Yes, So in one of the previous classes, you can go back and look at that, how we talked about the thought distortions, and like one of them is all or nothing thinking, making feelings fact, and so there's so by using thought distortions, you'll be able to challenge that section a little bit more.
Yeah.
So 3 and 4 go nicely together, because in 3 we're looking at our emotional experience.
Yeah.
So how we really experienced it and what we wished we could do. And then 4 is what actually happened. What did you actually express? So if we have an experience, and I express, like, oh yeah, no, it was okay. Yeah, it's fine. And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could just like lay into Stephanie. I can't believe she did this. So I'm actually out of balance.
Right. And in the relationship, we're not gonna be able to really effectively problem solve, because I think it's okay. Meanwhile, you're like fuming.
Right. Yeah. So in 3 and 4, we want to make sure that you're noting what happened, and then what did you want to happen there. So noting down, this was my experience, and this is what I wished I could do or say. And then 4, this is what actually happened, and if someone saw me, this is what they would see. Would they see me smiling? Would they see me being like angry? And just noting the changes that you might want to make. And so the 5th is the aftermath, or the after effects. And so by going all the way through this process, what was the after effects? Did you have any long or short-term consequences? Were there any vulnerabilities? And asking yourself the question, how can I set myself up in the future so that I'm not constantly in these cycles? And you might even notice, if you start to fill out waves, quite often, that maybe the interpretations that tend to come up for you when you're those high numbers, maybe they're really related, and maybe they're similar, and then that will give you some information as to what beliefs or judgments that you might want to focus in on in order to be able to better regulate your emotional system.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we need to add about the wave? I think that's it. Yeah. And so I know it seems like it's just sort of as simple, like, this is all I do. I just need to like write down the wave of my emotions, and the answer is yes. Journaling out these emotions can be really, really helpful. And it's, like when we learn things in school, and we practice and practice and practice, and by practicing riding the wave of your emotion, eventually change starts to happen. And eventually you might notice when you're having a reaction before you actually get into those higher numbers. And then in the moment, you can challenge your interpretations and shift in the moment instead of needing to reflect afterwards. So that does happen, for you over time.
Yeah.
Okay. So we hope that you guys enjoyed our COPE videos, and we invite you to follow Therapeutic Oasis on our social medias if you missed any of these and you would like to see some of the other ones. And then of course we include links to all of our worksheets for these classes, and we encourage you to share them with your communities.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.